Hey, this is Michael here. I just recorded the about like 40 minutes worth of the podcast, and I realized that I forgot to put this in at the beginning. But if anybody out there wants to commission me to make them a YouTube channel icon, YouTube art, Twitter art, really like anything in between. Um, I will leave my business email in the description, and I'm sure we'll be able to work something out. Starting prices for a YouTube thumbnail and or a YouTube avatar and background art start at $50. One or either are going to start at 25. Um, but if you would like to commission me to make you channel art, such as what I did for Ben McBrayer, who I had on the last episode of the podcast, um, I'll show the art right there. Um, if you would like me to make you something, just give me a brief description of what you want, and I will be sure to get it to you as quickly as I possibly can. It may take a little while because I've obviously got a few other art projects that I'm working on in between. If you are interested, I have an art stream that I do on Twitch. Um, it doesn't have a schedule, so you really have to pay attention to it. Uh, but that's about all of my shameless plugging for now. You guys go ahead and enjoy the rest of the podcast. See ya. Hello, people of the internet, and welcome to the second rendition of the Conquer Party podcast, hosted by yours truly, MistaXFacta, sometimes referred to as Michael or Mikhail. And today I wanted to make this episode specifically about professional wrestling because it is a topic that A, I have immense interest in, and B, has been fucking blowing up this past week. There's a ton to talk about. I'm doing this alone because nobody that I know personally is into professional wrestling. None of my friends ever really grew up with it. A few of them did, but a lot of them sort of dropped it along the way. In a way, they grew up, I guess. But shut up. I'll be a kid as forever. I'll be a kid forever. I'm never growing up. Um, but there's been a lot of stuff going on in specifically WWE. New Japan can be a complete separate video. Um, but shit's been going down, and I wanted to take a second here and just honor uh, Big Van Vader. He died, I believe today. I believe Vader passed away today. Um, at least it came out to the news that he did. Vader, for those of you who don't know, legendary heavyweight in the wrestling business. He was one of the first people to really show that weight doesn't really matter, that you can do whatever you want in a wrestling ring. Because he was the first like 400 plus man to do like flips and all this crazy aerial shit in the ring. And to be fair, Vader lived a lot longer than he probably should have. He was he participated in many hardcore and extreme matches throughout his illustrious career. Um, he was IWGP Heavyweight Champion. I believe he was WCW Heavyweight Champion for a period. I can't remember if he achieved much in WWE or if he even really was. He was in WWE, but not for too long. Um, but Vader, I believe he lived to 62, I read. No, he lived to 63. So, um, man, he was really an innovator, for his time. He was a legendary character. He really, no matter where he went in the world, he would always put on um, a fantastic match. He was beloved or absolutely hated in a kayfabe sense, um, everywhere he went. But he died of a heart failure while battling pneumonia, and he died on Monday night. So he has been dead for about 2 days as of recording this. And like I said earlier, he lived a lot longer than he probably should have, especially since he was a wrestler during the 80s and 90s. He probably had way too many drugs in his system. But for him to battle through not only um, his age, uh, but multiple injuries. He fucking popped his eye out in the middle of a match and put it back in and continued wrestling, and I believe he won that match actually. Um, but he's gone through so much, and for him to live until 63 is a massive achievement, and he will be missed. I know he was one of my personal favorites. He is probably one of my favorite old school wrestlers. He's just an iconic personality. I think it's just he's the big guy who will fuck your shit up. Um, yeah, Big Van Vader, Leon White. Rest in peace, man. But now that we got the sad shit out of the way, let's move to some of the stuff that would make old Big Van Vader happy, such as Braun Strowman at Money in the Bank, this past Sunday. Um, Vader probably did watch it, and he was probably very proud, um, because Braun Strowman is, uh, I think he's 300, almost 400 pounds. He's bringing the whole like big monster character back because he won the Money in the Bank briefcase. So my boy gets a title shot whenever he wants against Brock Lesnar. And really, um, speaking of Money in the Bank, both briefcases went to Raw, and I really can't blame WWE for making that decision, especially with the unique predicament that Raw has been caught up in, with Brock Lesnar for the past like half a decade now, almost full decade now, I guess, because Lesnar came back in like 2012, I think. That would only be 6 years still, but Lesnar has held the world title pretty consistently for the past at least 5, 6 years. And in those 5 to 6 years, he has defended it less than any champion that has held the title for as long as he has. And that is because Brock Lesnar is an MMA fighter, and he is uh, an incredibly big star that does not like wrestling. He is very adamant, and he's said in interviews, he's expressed his distaste towards wrestling and doing it as a sport, and he he claims that he gets very drained, um, even by just doing like the fan signings, because Brock Lesnar is also a massive introvert. He does not like talking with people too often. He lives like on a farm in like bumfuck Pennsylvania, or I can't remember what state he lives in. Colorado? I don't know. he lives somewhere on a farm with his wife, and Raw and WWE, they really sort of caught themselves in a unique predicament with Brock Lesnar, because now that he's in the WWE, I believe that brought over some UFC fans to watch WWE as long as Brock was on the card, and he Brock is more of an icon than probably any other wrestling figure in the past. Um, Brock Lesnar, he gets what he wants. Plain and simple, that's what Brock gets. Brock gets what Brock wants because if he doesn't, then he leaves the company, and that's a what WWE still believes is a good chunk of their profits because Brock Lesnar can sell a wrestling match to fucking oblivion. Like he can sell a wrestling match to a fucking like 35-year-old skeptic who believes that wrestling should be fucking uh, outlawed because it is not a sport. He could sell a match to that fucker. Um, and uh, the they've been building Braun Strowman up as this incredible monster character who can like overcome like any odd and like kick the shit out of anybody and anything. Um, and I feel like giving the Money in the Bank over to Braun is really the only possible way that that the title can be stripped off of Brock Lesnar. Because if anyone else were to go out and like, because here's the thing too, is that Brock is never, he never wrestles. I've established this. Um, so how the Money in the Bank works is you have to cash it in. You can cash it in whenever you want, but you can cash it in for a title shot, as we've seen in the past, or you can cash it in after their match when they're all worn out and beat up. Like we saw at Money in the Bank with the women's title match for SmackDown, or for Raw, excuse me. But Braun Strowman right now is because of how much of an icon they've built up Brock Lesnar to be from his already iconic status. Um, Braun Strowman seems like the only other like inhuman athlete kind of personality character that could actually beat Brock Lesnar in a one-on-one match if he were to just cash it in and say, "Hey, let's have a fight." Um, but we've also gotten news that Brock Lesnar is to defend his Universal title, which might I add, fantastic name, Universal title. He is to defend that at like 2 months from now. Um, but that's not really what I'm interested in. I don't give a shit about Brock or Raw or any of that shit right now. Let's talk about SmackDown for just a quick second because there was a gauntlet match recently to decide who AJ Styles was going to face for the WWE title at Extreme Rules. And among the participants were Big E, there was Rusev, there was The Miz, Samoa Joe, and Daniel Bryan. Out of all of those, there are two of them that seemed likely from like any sort of standpoint. Like Daniel Bryan, very likely to be chosen because uh, that's a fucking dream match right there. Two of the top indie stars of all time clashing together for an unforgettable match for the WWE title. And Samoa Joe, because Joe and AJ have had a lot of experience fighting each other in TNA before either of their WWE careers. But neither of them won the match. It was in fact fucking Rusev who won, which I think is it's very interesting to me. Um, because Rusev, it makes sense because Rusev has a lot of hype about him. He's never really looked any better. He has looked the best that he has his whole career. He's putting on great matches. He's got a fantastic gimmick. Um, it's just that it's Rusev. Really is the only thing that I can uh, the only way I can describe my issue with this because Rusev isn't necessarily a top level performer when it comes to professional wrestling. He is, um, I mean, he's a good wrestler. That's definitely his forte. He's not that good of a talker, I don't think. Um, but Rusev, I don't know if he is necessarily ready for world title gold yet. Um, don't get me wrong, I am incredibly happy that Rusev is getting an opportunity like this at all because he's been in the WWE for about half a decade now, and he has fucking worked his ass to the fucking like pelvis bone. He has ground his ass into the floor so that there is nothing left but fucking pelvis to get to where he is, and how can you not be happy? But um, at the same time, when you compare him to somebody who has the experience and the intuition of AJ Styles, it's a really uneven pairing right there. Um, but you also got to take into consideration that it's probably going to be an Extreme Rules match, being that it's at the Extreme Rules pay-per-view. So, of course, they didn't want Daniel or Joe getting hurt, for that matter. So I think Rusev is an expendable asset, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Um, he can be used to he can be used by WWE like a fucking pawn to keep AJ Styles' heat up, his popularity up, um, while also preventing the injury of um, any of their other top talents because it's obvious that Daniel Bryan and Samoa Joe, they are geared for world title gold at some point. Um, Daniel still has to prove that uh, he. I think what Daniel still needs to prove is that he won't be held back by injury because that's been his main issue that's plagued him for fucking years now. And Joe, I feel like um, SmackDown just doesn't really. Um, I don't know if they trust him yet, just as an athlete, even though he's been wrestling for upwards of like 10, 15 years now. Um, but yeah, we're in a very interesting position when it comes to SmackDown, when it comes to like all around um, wrestling in general. Going back to Raw for a second, we got a fucking new Intercontinental Champion in the show off fucking Dolph Ziggler, which was fucking nuts. Especially since Raw is not the type of brand like we've already seen this in the past. Like they don't want to take the title off of Brock because they're worried that their viewership will plummet. Um, they keep people in rivalries for upwards of like 2, 3 months. Raw is the writing team behind Raw is very, very scared of experimenting. And 2 nights ago on Monday Night Raw, they did, and it turned out really good. It turned out fantastic. Um, because that shit like stole the entire like show for me. Like the that episode of Raw from that point on was just absolute garbage. Even like the Balor Braun match at the end, everything after that was trash because it was so good. Um, Seth's been stealing the show a lot recently. Money in the Bank. I personally think that he had the best match of the night with Elias with his Intercontinental title defense then. Um, but that was like Seth is an incredible athlete. Seth right now I think a lot of people like Seth because he is uh, one of the more popular, um, and one of the best wrestlers that can possibly compete with the fucking influx of MMA fighters that we've had coming into the WWE since Brock Lesnar. Um, because you got Brock as the Universal Champion. Uh, Joe has a martial arts background. Um, Nakamura has a martial arts background. The diva scene is getting raided with former UFC talent, such as Ronda Rousey and fucking what's her name? She is the current whoever the current NXT Women's Champion is. I can't remember her name now. Um, but WWE is getting an influx of actual fighters to our fake fighting company, which, might I add, I'm not too happy about. Like with Brock Lesnar, it's fine. I think with Lesnar, it was okay because Lesnar was a wrestler before he was ever an MMA fighter. He was an amateur wrestler when he was in high school, and he was one of the biggest stars in WWE in the early 2000s. So I thought that it was okay that Brock came back, but obviously he inspired a lot of um, crossing over between WWE and UFC, as we've seen with CM Punk and his attempted integration into the Ultimate Fighting Championship roster. Um, but yeah, it's not something that I like because as a wrestling fan, as somebody who understands that wrestling is fake, um, that sort of like immersion and the entire like all of the like fucking like 30, 40 plus years of world building that WWE has done will be is I feel like being slowly torn down by the integration of actual fighters who come in and essentially just say, "Hey, WWE is fake. Real fighting will beat professional wrestling any day of the week," and they're not wrong. Obviously, they're not wrong at all because it's not fighting. It's a big fucking sham. But at the same time, I'm not watching it to watch an actual fight, you know? I'm watching wrestling like, for this weird, uh, s- dramatic, story-based, competitive, fake sport that I've been watching since I was a kid. I'm not watching it so that I can watch people actually beat the shit out of each other. I'm watching it so that I can uh, see some guys perform a very well done uh, slightly scripted, improvised performance. And now we bring actual MMA fighters into the wrestling world, and they immediately dominate. They win all the titles. They keep them. They work on UFC rules. Like that's one of the reasons why I stopped watching WWE for a brief period of time, and I went over to other brands of wrestling such as Ring of Honor and New Japan, um, because it's it's such a silly thing for WWE to do. Um, Not only from a kayfabe standpoint, but from a business standpoint, because eventually you're going to remove all the value from all of your wrestlers on your show, um, and like we're seeing right now, Braun Strowman is the only one that they've built up in any way, shape, or form to be able to beat Brock Lesnar, and it's not because of his undying will or determination. It's because Braun Strowman is a fucking former power lifter and would snap any man in half with a fucking bear hug, you know. Um, it's not story based anymore. Which is why I like a show like New Japan. New Japan Pro Wrestling, even though you would say, hey, isn't that a lot more fight based? Yes, but here's the thing about professional wrestling is that each individual show, WWE, Ring of Honor, New Japan, they all work on, they and their writing teams work in like separate worlds of wrestling, essentially. Think of it like that, like some sort of like comic book series almost, where they have like different interpretations of what, like Marvel versus DC, where Marvel and DC separately have, or not Marvel and DC. Let's come up with like a better one, like the writers for Watchmen as compared to the writers of the Avengers. Um, the Watchmen have their own uh, idea and interpretation of what comics should be, and even though they work as a comic industry and like comic industry, even though they work for the same cause as the guys who are writing the Avengers, they will take an incredibly different perspective on it. And that's essentially what New Japan does compared to like WWE, is that from the start, New Japan Pro Wrestling was about the fighting. WWE has always been about the story and the characters, but New Japan has always had a part. New Japan has integrated characters over time, and that has become a core part of um, New Japan currently. But the fighting aspect has been there since the beginning. So when you bring in an MMA fighter or a somebody who's like a fucking shoot wrestler or somebody who like actually knows how to fight, it doesn't feel weird because everybody's supposed to know how to actually fight. Um, Not to mention that New Japan matches are just more they're just more better paced. They are just overall better than WWE matches. Um, because something like New Japan can, like an organization like New Japan can make their wrestlers do worse things than uh, what WWE could do, because WWE has like 4 or 5 wrestling shows like for each day of the fucking week, and they all cycle out like a lot of a similar roster of superstars. But New Japan, they don't have like a weekly schedule. They have like separate, like pretty much every event of New Japan is like a pay-per-view event that happens like every like week or two. So the wrestlers over in New Japan have a lot more time to relax and heal up than WWE wrestlers. So you'll see shit like people actually getting choked out in New Japan, people just getting fucking kicked and stomped in the head, and having their like fucking fingers ripped apart and all this crazy shit because they can do that. Which kind of sucks for WWE because they have worked themselves into a corner with this whole WWE Network stuff. They now have to maintain that like five televised shows a week and live events in between, um, because that's just the system that they've been working on. That's the system that's expected of them by the crowd, by the audience. And there's a lot of people who come up with a lot of different ideas on how to keep WWE interesting. Like I remember I saw something uh, that caught my eye a few years back on some wrestling forum that was about a guy uh, that was a guy talking about how wrestlers should be on a schedule cycle. Like there should be like for the four like quarters of the year there should be a set group of wrestlers that they were going to have be wrestling. Like you were gonna have like this group with superstar A, B, C, and D. They're gonna be the world, intercontinental, and the tag champions, and then their schedule would overlap um, with another group, and then they would transfer the titles over to people from Group A to Group B, and then Group A could rest up until their next cycle, which I think is really interesting. But I think it's very because of how systematic it is, it makes everything kind of predictable. Which, to be fair, as a wrestling fan, there are a lot of things that are predictable that you just kind of got to deal with. But I feel like um, if modified and done well, that could allow WWE to do um, really crazy matches and insane um, to just to be able to compete with New Japan, because even though WWE has like all of the money, they are by far the most successful wrestling organization of all time. Um, New Japan and Ring of Honor and other organizations like that are coming up from being just some random indie organization to being mainstays in the wrestling scene. You know, people who have been watching wrestling all their lives, and uh, they incredibly uh, the changes in WWE do not suit their interests at all, and they need a place to another organization to sort of like escape from WWE's shitty decision making, you know? Uh, and New Japan, Ring of Honor, Lucha Underground, and Impact Wrestling are all they all make up for something that WWE lacks, except for Impact, because Impact fucking sucks. But um, yeah, like Lucha Underground specifically is very interesting because they take for WWE fans and fans of wrestling all over the world. They take a very, very interesting uh, perspective on wrestling and what it should be. They look at wrestling and they say, okay, people know it's fake. They know that everything isn't real. So let's just, instead of making all the backstage segments, interviews, and promos. Let's just film a fucking TV show and then put matches in between the scenes. Because that's really what they do. They go with like camera angles, they put fucking subtitles all over it. Um, they put like fucking it's like in a fucking widescreen camera. It's fucking really dramatic and silly and like there are people that love it. There are people that love Lucha Underground for that reason. Because WWE treats itself really realistically in comparison to it, and Lucha Underground is just able to have a little fun with its ridiculous production quality. Personally, it's not for me, but it has found an audience with many other people. And like I said, New Japan treats itself much more realistically than WWE because people actually do, whenever you do watch a New Japan match, they are getting hit. They are, like, in some instances, actually fighting each other. And all of the backstage segments are just showing, like, the mayhem that like the most interesting backstage segments are just showing like, hey, look, here's this big asshole guy who's just sort of like causing a ruckus backstage, but most of the time it's just like, look at this post-match interview, you know? Um, it's very grounded. It's very um, set in this sort of weird wrestling reality where it can get you to believe that they're actually um, fighting a fight, you know? Um, and Ring of Honor is like I think it's the most similar to WWE. It's like the sort of um, it's wrestling fans wrestling. There's tons and tons and tons of risky and crazy shit that happens every match. Um, and it's really just for top tier Western wrestlers to come together and have great matches. That's really all it is. WWE is the most popular. Ring of Honor is the highest quality. Um, New Japan's the most grounded, and Lucha Underground is the least grounded in multiple ways. That's about all I wanted to talk about with wrestling. But there are a few other topics that I'd like to hit before I stop recording this. Um, Mainly in the art category. As I should have said in the beginning of the video, um, I uh, recently finished up Ben McBrayer's channel art. His channel will be in the description below. He was on the last podcast, and it came out pretty good. I think that this is an avenue that I would like to start branching into, doing commissions. Uh, I don't necessarily know how it works all too well. Um, I know like basic pricing and stuff like that, but I don't know how to limit it. I think I'll probably, if I'm going to do it at all, limit it to like 3 commissions at a time because I have the comic that I'm working on, and I work on the podcast art for each of these episodes as well. Um, so yeah, that's something that I wanted to do. Um, I've been looking into doing commissions for a little while now, but I don't know. It's a really I guess I've been waiting for my debit card to really be able to do it. Um, because I wanted to be able to open up a PayPal. I wanted to be able to open up a Patreon, and I was going to start doing all this shit like incredibly seriously. But now that I'm here, I guess the only thing that's really stopping me is my own uh, my weird obsession I have with worrying over everything. Um, 'Cause there's really like there's no reason to worry, I don't think, about opening up a Patreon or anything like that. I'm just like, I don't know, man. It's a lot of stuff. That's what I'm worried about the most is that once I started doing the comic, the podcast art, and commissions for my personal friends, I have not really found much time to be able to sit down and just sketch out some random stuff and just draw like I used to, which is something that I realize that I miss a lot. Um, so I think I'll give it some time. Uh, I will give it some time for the commissions. I don't know about the Patreon though. I think that would probably open up sooner. That depends on if anyone really wants to give me money for this shit. um, but uh, I'll probably make some Patreon art and then open that up. Um, because funny story about the Patreon, um, I I made one a long time ago. I never launched it, but I made one. And it was all for my last comic series that I started up. And I booted up Patreon recently to just like sort of like check to see if I had an account and what all I needed to do. And I just read through all of it and I was like, Jesus Christ, I had an entire fucking world planned out and it was gonna be like I remember I was super proud of it. It was gonna be my fucking baby, but it wasn't my first rodeo that I fucking just got kicked off the bowl and I just sort of stopped. So I changed everything around to YouTube and the comic that I'm creating. So um, I'll probably reveal what exactly the comic is um, sometime before the first issue comes out. I think I'm finally settling in when it comes to that process also. Um, so once I'm about halfway done with this first issue, I'll reveal what the contents of the comic are, and I will start selling issues of it by like probably like the dollar or something like that. Um, so yeah, another thing that I've been thinking about with the comic is advertising because the only thing that's really kept me from continuing with YouTube and any other comic ideas that I've had is this idea that I won't be successful doing it. And obviously, that's still something that I have in the back of my mind, as I just mentioned, but it's not that big of an issue to me anymore because this is something that I just really like to do personally. Um, and I don't know. I'm worried that once I actually do um, finish up the first issue or two of the comic and I start selling it and it doesn't do too well, that I'm going to feel like crushed because I really wanted it to succeed. But I'm I'm pretty confident that I just want to do this because I want to do it. The other ones, I wanted to do them and I wanted to make them and put them on the internet, but it was just all too much work and I was riddled with doubt the whole time. But now, I'm not really like completely stomping that doubt out, but I'm sort of pushing it off to the side while I get the work done. you know. And for that, I'm actually kind of proud of myself, because it takes a little while for me to get over stuff like that. It's really like the artist's plague, I think, is doubt. Because like if you're any aspiring artist, you'll know the uncertainty of success really just sort of it fucks you up, for a lack of a better term. um, like you'll be sitting there wondering if your next song will come out and people will actually listen to it, what kind of revenue you're gonna make from it because you put so much time into it, or you're gonna or obviously you could be like painting and you could just be like, well, what if no art dealer or anybody actually sees any value in what I do? Just art is a very incredibly risky and stressful business to get into, and I feel like going through this first step of pushing doubt to the side and doing art for the sake of art, I feel like that is a that's very important. Um, so if there are any aspiring artists out there that want to get a film or a illustration comic, anything, if you want to produce anything and make money with it, what I would recommend is just shut the fuck up and do it. Because if you're more worried about its success than actually getting it done, then you won't have a product to actually sell. So, wise words with the guy who still hasn't even broken into the business yet. And when I say selling issues of the comic, I don't mean like, oh, here's like a paper that like it's probably going to be a web comic for quite some time, um, before anything really like gets off the ground. But I believe that that is all that I really wanted to touch upon. Sorry for anybody that isn't really a big wrestling fan. It was a big WRASSLE-CAST. I know that. But it's I don't really have anybody to talk to about this kind of stuff. So having this podcast really allows me to um, share some opinions that I don't usually get to talk with my friends about too often. Uh, so yeah, next podcast I should be having a guest. I'm probably going to take a break from this for the next, since this is the, let's see, is this the last, yeah, this is the last Sunday of June. I think I will give um, the first two of July a break, and then I will hit the 15th, 22nd, and 29th of July with one podcast each. Um, I should be able to have a guest for each of those. I'll try to get a variety of guests. Um, I, if you would like to be a guest on the podcast, feel free to message me. My um, Gmail again will be in the description. Um, And that is it. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed my rambling ons about big, sweaty gay men just groping each other for other people's amusement. Um, because I know I did. My throat most certainly didn't. I am really parched. I always get really parched doing these one man podcasts. But next time I'll be able to give my throat kind of a rest. That's a sentence I'm used to saying. Get it, sucking dick. Oh. Um, and I hopefully will see most of you guys there. I love you, and goodbye. That was a fucking shitty outro.